Climate relations, as well as times ahead, are at the heart of Beatrice Preciado's book, Testo Junkie. Preciado then cross-dresses into the deceased comrade and begins her series of rendezvous with testo gel, synthetic testosterone, as if to bring the friend back to life. The purpose of taking the hormone is not to become a man, but to test chemically induced sensations, a ritual moving far beyond established categories of sex, gender, and objects. The encounters with testogel involve the cutting of hair, shaving, making mustaches from the just cut hair, donning dildos, looking into mirrors, and recording the whole procedure for online sharing. At the heart of this performance, beautifully described in great detail, lies a desire for transformation, even a metamorphosis of life in contemporary society. I think Preciado tells us something about a fundamental rift in biopolitics and the nature and economy of desire, about what more of the future will be like, but also what making theory can be, far beyond academicized routine. Preciado then takes the reader on what she calls a somatopolitical journey through the world economy, where she claims that a new type of government of the living has emerged in the period after the Second World War through the forceful interaction between advanced capitalism, global media, and biotechnology. She labels this new type of government the pharmacopornographic regime. It's worth repeating, the pharmacopornographic regime. The emergence of terms such as transsexualism, 1954, and gender, 1957, changes in economic and governmental regulations of pornography and prostitution in the Western world, and the development of synthetic molecules for commercial use paved the way for this sex-gender industrial complex. The pill and Playboy are early and widely disseminated components of this material discursive apparatus of bodily production that includes feedback loops. Viagra and Prozac are more recent examples. All of which is to say that today, psychotropic techniques and biomolecular and multimedia protocols affect subjectivity in hitherto unseen ways. Not only is this affecting millions of individuals in our most intimate lives, but also sexuality and its semiotechnical derivations. And these are the main resource of post-Ford capitalism, according to Preciado. It is a new model of production, the control, production, and intensification of narco-sexual effects. Another good term, narco-sexual effects. If work is the central concept in classical economy, and of course Marxism, then potentia gaudendi, or orgasmic force, is the equivalent in the pharmacopornographic regime. Potentia gaudendi is the strength of a body's excitation, its own extension in space and time. It is an event, relation, practice, an evolutionary process, half fetuses and half zombies, individual bodies as extensions of global communication technologies, oscillating between excitation and frustration. It is the planetary management of naked techno-life through virtual audiovisual connections. So, for me, reading Preciado's book, Preciado is nowadays known as Paul B. Preciado, was a thoroughly pleasurable experience on the level of thinking through something with somebody who has a wonderful grasp of language, clearly a philosophical approach to things based on detailed research of a certain kind of material. And it occurred to me while doing this that this kind of writing is not very common as far as I can see. And it also made me realize that I almost gave up reading art writing. I've come to reconsider this through the summit, thanks to the encounters of many colleagues who are in the room, who've been speaking about writing, who've been reading their writing. So I have to return to it a bit more. But at the time when I read Testo Janki, I felt that I don't want to spend my time so much on art writing. Maybe I should look elsewhere somehow. And the term that came to me in terms of thinking about Testo Janki was metabolistic writing. Metabolistic in the sense that it is something that has gone through a system. The writer in this case has worked her way through something. It's processed. And something quite different comes out at the end. One could, of course, invoke the well-known notion of anthropophagia, the cannibalism notion that the Brazilian theoretician and writer Osvaldo de Andrade used in 1928 for his Cannibal Manifesto, where he speaks about how Brazil, but actually also Latin America more widely, how these regions have cannibalized Western traditions. They cannot simply be seen as victims. There are also other processes at play where local indigenous cultures actually have recuperated quite violently what has come to their shores. But when I thought of metabolistic writing, it seemed less violent than the anthropophagia, also less dramatic somehow, more mundane, and interestingly, I think in relation to Nabil's presentation, it's down to a much more chemical level. It's to do with what is scripted in the DNA, and yet it's very individual from person to person how the metabolism is working. Another case for me, which has turned out to function similarly, is Keller Easterling's book, Extra Statecraft, The Power of Infrastructure. And it's written by somebody who comes from architecture and urban studies. And she looks at free zones, optic fiber networks, credit cards, mobile phones, economic regulations in a globalized situation. And she takes this to a new level, talking about the powers that control more and more of space beyond the reach of governments. So it's about hidden geographies in the plural of globalization. Again, extremely beautifully written, partly witty, thoughtful, and beyond the academicized routine. I'm not going to delve further into this, but it's another example where, to my mind, this metabolistic writing is actually happening. Of course, you could argue that this is what any good writer does. Otherwise, it's superficial. Yes. But the thing with both Preciado and Easterling, I think, is that they come from specific disciplines, philosophy or architecture. So they're also partly framed by traditions within those fields, but they then take them much further through this sort of metabolistic approach. An artist, an author, whom I think does something similar by mixing fields and disciplines is Matias Faldbakken. In 2001, he published The Coca-Cola Company, Scandinavian Misanthropy, which was published under a pseudonym, namely Abu Rasul. And he only revealed his real identity once the book had been acclaimed through reviews, and he had to appear on TV sofas, and he couldn't actually hide anymore who he actually was. And the book deals with issues around the social welfare state, corporate culture, how perversion on various levels ends up being the norm. It's energetic, written in a very energetic language. It's quite scary, it's quite funny. And the subsequent book, Macht und Rebel, also a novel, Scandinavian Misanthropy #2 from 2003, followed this, track somehow. As an artist, his work plays on some of the same tropes. This is a series of silk screens from 2012, where he used overprinting, overlayering, a feature from his novels as well, making the starting point blur. Direct attitudes are important, and also references to various subcultures. In this case, with the prints, it is computer and the computer and console game Battlefield, which features teamwork and vehicle warfare, so it actually harks back to some of the presentations earlier today. The sloppy installation with its brown sticky tape clearly enacts some of this attitude. So you could say that what he does in his metabolistic approach is that acts of destruction are transformed into aesthetic forms, and abstraction plays an important role here. And abstraction, as abstrahere, the etymological sense in Latin, is of course to withdraw, abstrahere, to step aside, which is something that I will mention a little bit later. I'd like to bring up one more example, and this time it's poetry. The Weather by Lisa Robertson is an airy publication which is following a rock-steady rhythm, the days of the week. No matter how much we try and stretch time and squeeze in another job, one more project, an extra task, that's the rhythm. Dusk and dew and ripples and sun smoke fill the pages. It is the meanderings of a weather with some personality, not always reliable and yet not completely unreliable. Human scale and meteorological dimensions at once, thus weather and not climate, landscape and not geology. Deep materialism and eccentric emotions hold hands here. And I think this long poem holds quite an unusual power, a sort of referential stability in the midst of things fleeting, to use one of Robertson's own expressions, referential stability. And for someone like me, who does not read poetry that regularly, not out of dislike or disinterest, but simply due to time being stuffed with other things, reading this book a couple of years ago was a bit of a revelation. And wanting to find out more, I dug into the writing of Robertson, and a powerful practice emerged, one which stretches from urban deliberations with Vancouver at the heart, and founding an office for soft architecture there, to experimenting with glasses, like this kind of glasses, with pink lenses, to publishing pure poetry. The author is not young, but not exactly old either. She has published books with titles like Magenta Soul Whip, Execlog, and Debbie an Epic. She writes for magazines and journals and teaches writing at art schools. In a recent conversation with her old friend, the poet and painter Ethel Adnan in Bomb magazine, there is lengthy talk about love, and about how great philosophy is thinking and feeling at the same time, how great poetry surely means writing and feeling at the same time too. And maybe that was what happened to me when I read these things, and maybe that is what I'm looking for more when I do have time to read. So reading, listening, and feeling at the exact same moment somehow. And if it's not a quick fix, then at least it's some kind of instant poetics, I think. No delay allowed, but with strong effects. So in this interview between the artist and poet Ethel Adnan and Robertson, they discuss obscurity being as rich as luminosity. And I quote, "Some things are not meant to be clear. Obscurity is their clarity." And it's Adnan who says that at some point. And then I came across Robertson's book, The Men, a lyric book from 2006. And I was not prepared for such a precise and yet virtual dissection of contemporary men. Here, Robertson enters the realm of distant observation. Men become the object of her scrutiny. Most likely unbeknownst to herself, she offers another revelation, I think, and I would like to read just a few lines from this. "They are both sublime and beautiful, delicate, and copious, rolling and touching, and rubbing one against another in their most serious actions. But nothing makes them men but their word in the new-found world. I study them more than any other subject, studying hard in this disordered rabble, remembering to drink water, judging soundly like a man. The ceremonies and decorations, the opportunities for ornament, inorganic and misty they exist, against gravity, and they fail. Glamorously their ideal, which is to float, in the air without any support, so beautiful and sucking." And she ends the poem with, "The funny pathos of men, I salute this." Actually, I started laughing when I read it. So, trying to, for myself, think through what it is that attracts me to all these various versions of writing in what I would think of as a metabolistic way, is that it is condensed also and porous at the same time. And thinking about what Chus Martinez said during her presentation as part of the critical writing ensemble a few days ago, about the disappearance among younger generations of both reading and writing, and the non-linear coming to the fore, you can compare writing as an activity and reading a book on the one hand, and experiencing an art exhibition or an artwork on the other hand, which is that with curating, with an exhibition, you have the disjuncted, you have the synchronic, but you somehow also have the diachronic. So there is something to say about presenting artworks in physical space where time is necessarily an issue, but you don't have to focus intently on one thing maybe for a very long time, which I think makes it very interesting in relation to younger generations with this kind of, as you described it, almost deficiency somehow in terms of concentration or focus or whatever. And here I think maybe there is something we can come back to later. There is something very interesting about what's going on today when you look at younger artists, for example, and that is a wish to avoid, as I can see, anchors, the fantasy of no referent. So almost the opposite of what Mariam is doing, not dig into something for a long time and be totally dedicated, but actually to dream about a situation where you don't have to be attached to that important matter, whatever it is. So distraction and focus at the same time. So this leads me to yet another way of using writing, where the artists are not writing themselves, but they involve writing and they implicate writing in many of their projects. And it's the Stockholm-based duo Goldin and Seneby. They define themselves as a collaboratory framework exploring juridical, financial, and spatial constructs. And they are right now having a retrospective exhibition at Tensta Konsthall in Stockholm, where I'm the director. And part of that, and I would have to say even more than part of that, completely integrated into that, scripted into the DNA of the project, is a short story written by the acclaimed Swedish author Jonas Hassenkemiri. So the retrospective by the collaborative framework is taking place in many different places in the city. At the art center, the Konsthall, which is located in a suburb of Stockholm called Tensta, there are two new works. One is this giant oak tree that has been installed at the center of the exhibition space. Around the oak tree, some of the branches have been left, and during the exhibition, a carpenter, Moa Ott, will make seating furniture so that gradually there will be more space for encounters under the oak tree, and they will be of different kinds, organized by the art center, but also some courses from the Stockholm Business School will relocate and happen under this oak tree. Over the past 10 years, the Stockholm-based artist duo has explored virtual worlds, offshore companies, withdrawal strategies, abstraction as a social methodology, and subversive speculation. In a unique and subtle way, they combine artistic practice, financial theory, and performative methods, which are sometimes borrowed from the world of magic. So, as I mentioned, the retrospective takes place at the art center, but also at a number of other places in the city. In a fashion store, the business school, the Finance Inspection Authority, Finansinspektionen, for those of you who are Swedish speakers in the room, and the third AP fund, which is a state pension fund, and an art historical museum, where there is a lot of landscape painting in the collection, and their work dealing with land and ownership of land is being presented. So let me just go back here. So the involvement of literature through the writing of Jonas Hassenkemiri is on the level of complete integration. I started to talk to Goldin and Seneby about the possibility of a retrospective about 3 years ago. And part of that discussion was that outsourcing, which is one of their key artistic methods in mimicking late capitalism and post-Fordism in general, meant that we ended up deciding that we wanted somebody to respond to their 10-year of collaborative work. And this person was the author Jonas Hassenkemiri. He was not new to their work. He had followed it because he happens to be very interested in contemporary art. And the outcome was a short story entitled Standard Length of a Miracle, a title we had already decided for the retrospective. It's a peculiar short story, no full stops, no exclamation marks, no question marks. It's written as if almost in one breath. And the story is about a young man who wants to get a job in an art center, but he realizes that his background and his name probably won't work so well. He's an other to the system. And the way he deals with it is that he tries to learn and insert himself into the system while at the same time working at a dry cleaners. And this is where the different parts of the new works in the retrospective come in, such as this. Golden and Seneby asked a fashion designer to design something in relation to the retrospective, and she in turn wanted to use forgotten clothes in dry cleaners in Stockholm, so she has refitted them into a new, what do you call it, line, fashion line, called Anders Reuterswärd, which is the name that the character takes in the short story in order to try and fit better into the art world. And this is also the fashion line that is now being sold in the fashion store called A Day's March in the city center. The character goes through a number of complications, and I would like to end by reading a few lines of the short story. He enters the room, sits down, and says, "Wait a second. Don't say anything. Just take it easy. Let me have my say, because I know what you're thinking. I can read your faces like an open book. You look at me and think I'm a liar. You're thinking, surely this guy can't be Anders Reuterswärd. And yes, you're right. I admit it. I made up that name so I could come here. I borrowed Anders from my old basketball coach. Reuterswärd is from a customer who brings his suits to us. He plays handball, has 3 kids, and is related to a mountain climber who died on Mount Everest. The relative, that is, the customer is fine. He came by last week to pick up his clothing, jackets with button sleeves, shirts with gold threads on the labels, raw denim designer jeans that had to be dry cleaned. We did it all, and he said thanks and paid, and folded the clothes into the back seat of his shiny silver Audi A4, and once he was gone, I tested out Anders Reuterswärd on my application, and something happened. 1 plus 1 became 3, where 1 was my experience, and 1 was Anders Reuterswärd, and 3 is the fact that we're sitting here today. I suspect you would have formed a different impression of me if I had written my real name. You might have forgotten the idea that I couldn't be trusted, that I would try to filch the art instead of guarding it, or that I would start fights with the visitors instead of helping them. But nothing could be further from the truth. You can rest 100% easy. I will be a perfect gallery attendant. I'm sharp and responsible. I'm service-minded and super socially competent. Lots of people give up when they come across a locked door, but I just take out the bobby pins and fashion a lockpick. When the highway is closed, I find a path. When people argue over whether the glass is half empty or half full, I am the ready with a carafe. I pour and pour until the glass overflows. No one will leave the room thirsty when I'm around. And when I say water, I mean water in the metaphorical sense. Water as a symbol of my torrents of creativity and my infinite stubbornness. But I have not always been this success case. You see before you now, 3 years ago, I was nothing. I had just been released from the hospital. My wife had left me. She had taken our daughters and moved to her parents' house in Strängnäs. I started helping out at my uncle's dry cleaner. I was planning to go back to the university at some point, but I was having some problems with my short-term memory. Sometimes I forgot people's names. Sometimes I got downtown and wasn't sure why I had come, who I was supposed to meet and where. And the doctor said it was perfectly normal. It might take up to 2 years before everything stabilized and the scar would heal too. It's not nearly as visible as it was back then. Right after the hospital, I noticed that people would react when I got on the subway. People made an effort not to look, or else they did look but quickly looked away again, or else they would use the reflection in the window to look when they thought I wasn't looking. The only ones who were honest were the kids, because they would look and point and ask their parents what had happened. And I didn't get mad. I never get mad. I just smiled at the kids and sat down further on in the car. And when I started at the dry cleaners, I was allowed to help here and there. I numbered hangers and went out with deliveries. I talked to customers and pinned up pants. I didn't think anything was different, but my uncle commented that I was talking non-stop. He said something must have happened at the hospital. He reminded me that I didn't need to ask everyone who came in about their weekend plans. He said he would fire me if I didn't quit my verbal diarrhea. And I tried to dial down my... We got more and more business. And after a few months, we expanded into the building next door. And later that fall, my uncle started talking about opening another branch closer to downtown. I'll end there. Thank you.